The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Loss in our lives takes on many different forms and can be more than just a physical loss. It goes beyond that to include emotional loss, business loss, and loss of personal health. This is Voices for Healing with Cathy Roberts. Today, Cathy and her guests will help you find out that you are not alone in dealing with loss and grief. There are so many different ways to deal with loss. What works for some may not work for others. Together, let's find the solution that you can use. Here's your host, Cathy Roberts.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Voices for Healing Talk Radio. I am Cathy Roberts. In my work as a professional counselor, coach, and educator based in the Washington, D.C. area, I work with people living with and growing in response to all sorts of loss and change. You can learn more about me and my work on my website, cathyroberts.net. And from there, we can connect on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and more. You could also subscribe and download Voices for Healing on iTunes and get regular podcast downloads. I want to acknowledge Pathways Magazine for their support of this program. Pathways is a free quarterly journal distributed throughout the Washington, D.C. area. You can pick up a copy at your favorite library or health food store. The summer issue is now available. And for listeners across the nation and around the world, you can read Pathways at www.pathwaysmagazine.com. Each week, the show features a guest who has expertise in some area of healing loss and finding opportunity. My wish for everyone listening is that you connect with some of what you hear on the show and be inspired to use challenges to grow and become your most real, authentic self. Today, our topic is changing the way we die, about hospice and the end of life care and the hospice movement. I'm really glad to have our guest on the show today. Many of you may not know, but in my early work as a counselor and psychotherapist, I did work at a senior housing center in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and at a senior community center in Upper Montgomery County, Maryland. And in this work, I dealt a lot with people who were going through aging and end of life. And that led me to even have some end of life care training at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, which was very wonderful. At that time, my parents were younger than they are now, and now as they are in their mid-80s and dealing with some of the issues that adults in their cohort deal with, I feel very privileged to have read Sheila's book. She's the co-author with Fran Smith of Changing the Way We Die, and to have Sheila on the show to talk about this really important topic. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Cathy. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. Let our audience know a little bit more about you, and then you and I can dive into our segment. Sheila Himmel is a Psychology Today blogger and the co-author of Hungry, A Mother and Daughter Fight Anorexia. She's also written, as I mentioned, Changing the Way We Die, Compassionate End-of-Life Care and the Hospice Movement. Her work has appeared in USA Today, The Washington Post, The Robb Report, and M Magazine. As a restaurant critic of the San Jose Mercury News, she won a James Beard Award for feature writing. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. Sheila, can you begin by telling us a bit about how you became interested in hospice and decided to write with Fran a book about this important topic?
Sure. As you mentioned, I wrote a book about eating disorders and got interested in healthcare. And my colleague at the Mercury News, Fran Smith, is a longtime healthcare writer, and we're friends, and we talked about doing a book together, and it turned out that our fathers were ill and died around the same time. So we talked about that, as friends, excuse me, as friends do, and we were comparing our stories. Fran's father died in the hospital after a lot of back and forth and a lot of aggressive medical care, and my father died in hospice, and our experiences couldn't have been more different. And I can go into details about our different experiences, but that was the germ of the book, was how can the end of life be so different? And what you remember is so important, what the family remembers. And my father, when hospice came in, it was like this shroud of anxiety just lifted from our family. And we had experts that we could ask about what was normal and what to expect. And we were there with him when he died, and it was so peaceful. And Fran wasn't there when her father died. So the whole experience led us to kind of think about what was this hospice thing that we, like many Americans, we didn't know anything about it. And we looked into it, and the more we looked into it, we were surprised. There were like many surprises, and we can go into that later too. But and then we thought, wow, there's a book in here, because most people, like us, thought of hospice as this sort of new agey thing from the 70s, and it turns out that it's almost half of Americans now die in hospice. And the more families we talked to, they just couldn't say enough about it, and universally they said they wished they'd known about hospice sooner. So that was what got us going on doing this book.
Yeah, I was surprised at the numbers. I've known about hospice for a long time, partly because of my interest in healthcare field and my work in counseling. And even though I'm a little familiar with the organizations in my area and have some familiarity with hospice through clients and friends who have entered into hospice, I was surprised at the numbers of people who do receive hospice care. You touched a little on one of the things that hospice does, which is educates both the patient and the family about what to expect, which can decrease anxiety and offer comfort in a sense that you're not alone and you know what's going to happen. Maybe you could delve into some of the other ways that traditional medical model end-of-life care and hospice care are different, like the differences between Fran's father's experience and her family's experience and yours.
Right. The normalizing is a huge thing for the family, because every family goes into this feeling like, they're the only ones who've ever done this, and they just don't know where to turn and whether they're doing things right, what they can really do, and what maybe they shouldn't even bother with. And that was the huge difference for us, was having 24 hours someone to call to ask if we should do something or not, let it go. Another big difference was, that was most of that was with the nurses, the care that they gave, and the calm was so important, and also the physicians with hospice. I mean, they work as a team. You get a doctor, a nurse, a social worker. If you want, you can have spiritual care, which scares a lot of people, but is actually really, really helpful. Social worker, you can have, people will help you, because often this is women left alone who haven't done their taxes ever or something. They will help you find somebody to help you with your taxes. All kinds of just from basic house care services to, as I said, spiritual care. Hospice offers these services, and in a team-based way. It's not that team works together, and they kind of each know what the other is doing, as opposed to the usual medical model where you have to tell them the same information over and over and over again. So that's just part of the difference. But we were just, it was like this relief. It was, okay, we know, my dad was in his mid-80s, and he'd been sick for a long time. We knew this was coming, and rather than run to the hospital every once, we were doing the ambulances and the emergency trips to the hospital, and he came back weaker. This is the same story as Fran's father. Each time from the hospital, he came back weaker, and with an array of medications. That's another aspect of hospice. One doctor looks at the whole list of medications, and often with people who are elderly, healthy or not, they can often be taking a lot of medications that no one has looked at in years. My father, for example, was still taking this cholesterol medication, which he clearly hadn't needed it in a long time. So the doctor came in and simplified the list so that all the side effects were modified, as well. So it just helped in that also they as I alluded to, they treat the family as part of the unit of care, and that is so important.
Yeah, it sounds like having that coordinated care team where everyone knows what's going on with the patient and is communicating together about it and offering support to both the patient and the family sounds very different from the hospital experience that can feel traumatic for people who are already traumatized by whatever illness or end-of-life issues are arising for them.
No, that's right, yeah.
Sounds like that's a real benefit. How do families or doctors determine how's it determined who's eligible for hospice? Who can enter into hospice care?
Well, the question is whether a doctor needs to certify that if your disease or your condition ran its natural course, would they be surprised if you were still alive in 6 months? That's to have Medicare cover hospice. Because unfortunately we still have this either or the 6 months. It's a very artificial timeline, because nobody can really predict when, particularly now, nobody can really predict exactly when somebody's going to die. But for Medicare to cover hospice, that they require that. So that's basically the criterion. And unfortunately, it's led people to fear that once the doctor mentions hospice, boom, that's it. You might as well just give up. And it's not giving up. I mean, nobody's giving up on you. It's just changing the mode of care to comfort care, rather than aggressive medical care, chemo and all that, that can leave patients very weak and unable to kind of be aware in their last months of life. Whereas in hospice, it can be the case that you feel better and are able to sort of to be there rather than be running to the hospital and hooked up to machines.
Mm-hmm. Within hospice, there's a different sort of acceptance of end of life. Like there's an acceptance that we are all going to die and that someone who is nearer may benefit by both them and their family knowing a little bit more about that, what that's like, and having a little peace around them as they do that.
Yeah, in hospice, it's a funny thing. We all have this underlying, kind of belief that, if we don't talk about it, it won't happen. And hospice lifts that. And when you find that once you do talk about it and acknowledge it's going to happen, and you realize that you have choices, that just as we prepare like crazy for birth, we can prepare for death, and it's going to happen, whether we talk about it or not. So we have choices at the end of life, just like we have choices in how we prepare for bringing in life. And it can be really, really meaningful, and just leaves the family with a real sense of I hate to say completion, but just peace, rather than anguish. Rather than anguish and feeling like, we didn't do enough, or we did the wrong thing, or all this regret. It's just such a gift to feel like the end of life was the way it was meant to be, and you know what? Maybe that can be that way for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I'm thinking, to just back up a teeny bit, is some of our listeners may not exactly know what it means to be in hospice. I remember when the term was first coming to my attention, I thought hospice was a place that you went. And while there may be centers that are treatment, are centers where people who are in hospice may go to spend some time or even to die, hospice isn't necessarily a place. It's more of a system or an integrated group that may come into your home as well. Could you maybe explain that in a little more detail than I'm doing right here?
No, that's right. That's exactly right. I mean, that is the biggest misconception about hospice. And I think it has something to do with the word hospice, because it sounds like hospital. And it originated in England, where it is a place. Most often there are residential hospices, and they're lovely. They're not just a place you go to die, but that is the biggest myth about hospice. And in the United States, 70% at least of hospice is done in the home or in residential care facilities, so that there's very little in-house hospice. There are some, but unfortunately most of this is left to families to take care of. I mean, as we know, that's there's a caregiver crisis in our country in general, and in the end of life, it becomes really acute because families are dealing with their loved ones in their home, and hospice provides nursing care and aides and all the other social worker and all that, but they're not there 24 hours. They come on a regular basis, and they're there. They're accessible by phone, and they will come in emergencies. But it's basically left to the families to care for the family's basic needs. So that's that. But it's in your home. It's not, and most Americans say they want to die in their own homes.
Yes. Yes, I think that's part of the beauty and value of hospice is that the care can happen in their own home, whether it's family caregivers or hired caregivers who get the support of hospice as well. People have more choice. And we'll get back to that when we come back. Sheila, we're already coming up on time for our first break. Let me leave our listeners with a quote from Leonardo da Vinci, who said, "While I thought I was learning to live, I have been learning how to die." We will take a short break and be right back with guest Sheila Himmel talking about hospice and changing the way we die. This is Cathy Roberts. Be right back.
Think you've seen everything there is to see in online television? Let us surprise you. Visit voiceamerica.tv today for sports, health, business, and more on demand 24/7.
Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019. Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information.
Now you don't have to stay linked to your desktop or laptop. Take Voice America on the go and listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at cathyroberts.net. That's Cathy at cathyroberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Welcome back to Voices for Healing. I'm Cathy Roberts. My guest is Sheila Himmel. We're discussing Sheila's book, Changing the Way We Die, Compassionate End-of-Life Care, and the Hospice Movement. As we ended our last segment, we were talking about choice and how hospice care can allow patients and their families to stay in choice about interventions or sometimes even compassionate lack of intervention. And this seems like a way that the dying person can be empowered when they can stay in choice. Sheila, can you comment about that and maybe elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, one of the best stories. Our book is full of stories of real people, with their real names. We don't use any composites or pseudonyms, so that readers can relate to these people as like themselves with their ups and downs. One of our best stories is of a woman who she was in her early 90s and totally debilitated by COPD, pulmonary disease. She couldn't walk. She hardly got out of bed, and she had an array of other conditions and was taking, 15 different medications, and was back and forth to the emergency room. Had episodes of severe dementia, and just totally out of her mind. She was became a different character. Family was just at their, they couldn't function, and she went on hospice and was able to stay in her own home. She was able to be in her bed with the plants on her patio that she had grown, and and birds. She loved nature, and she just, and she had her quilting group come to her house every week, and her friends came by, and just, this was also another case of the doctor taking the medications and saying, "Whoa, why are we, why are you still taking this?" And she was able to go to the beach an hour away. She was able to go to a nursery to see plants that she loved. And the best thing was her oldest grandchild had a baby, and she was able to meet that baby. And she died 8 hours after the granddaughter was, brought the baby to meet her. So, and who knows? It's like, who knows how people time their death, but it was so meaningful for this family to be able to, bring in the next generation and have their grandmother, meet her first great grandchild was just incredible, and they accomplished that because of making this choice not to do the the ambulances and the emergency room anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I appreciate you sharing that story with us and reminding us that when end of life is near, really quality of life is important. And by that woman being able to be close to nature and family and get out and take trips, her end-of-life experience was different than it would have been in a hospital bed with whatever kind of interventions may have been offered to her there. There's a quote in your book that struck me, and that was, "The last months, even the final days, can provide some of the most indelible moments in life." You gave a hint of that in the story that you just told us, but maybe you could share a little more of what that might look like in hospice for the patient and the family both.
One of the stories that we like to tell is of a man who was in his 60s and dying of lung cancer, and he was an avid golfer. He played golf, a lot in his life, and he was asked, What has this been like for you? What have been the what have you noticed in the last months of your life? And I mean, not the last months, but they asked him how he was feeling, and he said, he couldn't play golf anymore, but he could go to the golf course, and he said he felt the grass under his feet for the first time. He just, and that, it was this sense of awe. And of course, the grass had always been there, but it was the ability to kind of get rid of all the other stuff and just focus, and it made him notice something he'd never noticed and appreciated before, and he felt like whole about it, that it was, something for him that was very meaningful.
As you were speaking and telling that story, I thought of how when I travel to a new place, in travel around the country or world, my senses are heightened and sharpened, and I see things in a different way than I do when I'm wandering around the area that I've lived in for a long time. And as you were talking, I was thinking how as we near death consciously, we're traveling to a new place. And if we're aware as we make that journey, our senses can be heightened and sharpened in that way that I'm familiar with through travel. And that's what came to me as you shared that story. He's had grass under his feet his whole life, and yet now he sees it.
It's exactly right. And, and a lot of it has to do with lack of pain, too, or being able to control the pain. So that, because, when you're in pain, it's hard to focus on anything else. Mm-hmm. And when people are, debilitated, it's hard to focus on anything else besides loss. So hospice allows you to refocus and, realize that, the sun is up again today. There is grass that I can go and feel, it's under my feet. One of the story that we talk about in this regard at the beginning of our book, and it framed our book, it's a central question in our book, is what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And that came up for a man in his 50s who had been through hell in treatment of his leukemia, very aggressive leukemia, and he had all kinds of complications. He was in the hospital constantly. I think it was like 600 days he spent in the hospital over the 5-year period. And a friend recommended hospice, and this man was like, no, I'm not, he was a very hard-charging politician and corporate executive, and he was not giving up. But he agreed to allow the hospice social worker to come to his house and just kind of explain their services. And this was a young man, the social worker, and so Rusty, the patient, looked at him and thought, oh, what is he going to, he's younger than my kids. What is he going to tell me? And the young man listened to Rusty, the patient's story, and said, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And Rusty could, from that question, could see, okay, what was the path left to him? And ultimately, he did give up all the aggressive medical treatment and settled into his house and had friends over and wrote a book, because that's also a question that hospice, the social worker might ask, is is there someone you want to mend fences with? Is there someone you haven't seen in a long time? Are there any trips, if you're able, that you want to take? Just what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And of course, that's a question all of us should ask ourselves every day. But it's for most of it's easy to just ignore, and of course, because we're not going to die, other people die.
That question really gets sharpened into focus when end of life seems nearer rather than somewhere out there where we can't even imagine it.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that came through in reading your book was the number of people who would come home from the hospital not looking so great. And after coming home and beginning to have some time in hospice, they actually looked healthier and seemed healthier than when they came home from the hospital. And there's something in the writing or in the text of that maybe indicates that hospice focused on quality of end-of-life care rather than keeping the patient alive somehow works to help life be longer and the quality of life better. Do you agree with that, or can you comment on that?
There actually are studies about that. The largest one was a study of 4,500 Medicare patients who they were on average, those on hospice lived 29 days longer than the other patients. And patients with congestive heart failure did particularly well. They lived an average of 81 days longer than the non-hospice patients with the same diagnosis. So, what happens is the patient can come into hospice seemingly on the brink of death, and once their pain, nausea, or delirium are effectively controlled, they rally. And it actually happens so often that it has a name. They call it the hospice spurt. So it seems counterintuitive, especially if you think of hospice as giving up, but it is more common than you think. But if you think about it, it sort of makes sense. And my father, for example, it was the combination of medications was simplified, and all of the interventions and all the the energy that it takes to go to the doctor all the time is that's eliminated. The doctor comes to you.
I'm also thinking something about how once patients enter into hospice, there's the beginning of some kind of acceptance rather than resistance of what's happening. And it seems in my own life and in the lives of people I witness, as acceptance happens, then there's more room and more space for whatever's going on. And a lot of the pain, both emotional and physical, seems to come about through holding on and resisting. So I hear, you're not exactly saying this, but I'm hearing maybe underneath that there's something about beginning to accept or moving into it's not like a one moment thing, but a process of beginning to accept that, this is what's happening, and I'm going to do this in this way.
Yeah, you're not so tight, and fighting, like you're in a combat position when you as you say, acceptance and whatever. I mean, it's not a matter of boom, okay, now I get it. It takes a while, and it can often be too that just you realize it looking back that that was when things started to change. But it is just such a helpful mindset, and that to realize that that's another choice.
Mm-hmm. So in summary, what would you say patients gain from hospice care?
Well, they gain the team, that they feel like they have expert advice. They gain a calmness, that there's somebody that they can ask all the time what is normal and what isn't, and what to expect. What they should do. It's like having a personal coach, and as somebody who's been through it before, so that you don't feel so totally alone. And also, I wanted to mention one of the least known benefits of hospice is bereavement care, which is a huge benefit for family members and friends and people. There's all kinds of very specified bereavement care, like there are services for people who've lost friends to suicide, children, whatever the loss. There is Medicare mandates that hospice provide 13 months of bereavement care to the family, and the family is defined as however the patient defines their family, and it can include friends as well. And we have a couple of chapters in our book about an incredible bereavement care group of spouses, people who lost their spouses, and were at the worst point in their lives. They just felt like their lives were over because they'd lost, their partners, and came into this bereavement group, and the growth was just incredible. And there are now 3 couples came out of this group, and they're like family. They celebrate holidays together, and it just is a wonderful example of how life can go on when you think the worst has happened. Hospice provided them this chance for life to go on.
I enjoyed reading that section, as I used to be in a bridge group, Bridge the card game, and several of the couples in that group had met their partners through a bereavement group also. And so I loved reading that story because I thought, that happens probably all over the place. So.
Right.
Well, here we are. We're coming up on our second break. And as we go out for this break, let me share with you a quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was one of the people who early on began writing about death and dying and support and education for those who are dying and the people who are living with them. And she said, "Those who have the strength and the love to sit with a dying patient in the silence that goes beyond words will know that this moment is neither frightening nor painful, but a peaceful cessation of the functioning of the body." I leave you listeners with these words. We'll take a short break and we will be right back.
Your favorite Voice America Talk Radio Network shows and hosts are in your car, outdoors, and wherever you need them to be. Listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information. Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019.
Your favorite Voice America Talk Radio Network shows and hosts are in your car, outdoors, and wherever you need them to be. Listen anywhere. Get our mobile app for iPhone, BlackBerry, or Android at the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at cathyroberts.net. That's Cathy at cathyroberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Hello, listeners. I'm so glad you're with us today as Sheila Himmel and I talk about changing the way we die. As we begin our concluding segment of the program, I want to thank my colleagues at the Core Constellation Center in Rockville, Maryland, for their support of this program. Sheila, how can listeners reach you or learn more about your work for those who are listening and want to know more about hospice and your caring work on this project?
Right. We have a website. It's www.changingthewaywedie.com. And if we would love to hear from people, there's a little form that you can send us questions on that, and we will respond. And it has our schedule of appearances, and it has our all of our radio broadcasts and other video as well. So that's the best way to reach us and to get a feel for this whole topic.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that with us. We've really been talking up the ways that hospice is beneficial and helpful for the dying and the caregivers. I have a feeling some people have a less than positive experience with hospice, though, and I wonder if you might share some of the things that happen that are not so helpful or positive for people.
Right. Well, in our book, we have one very horrible case that a family in California is suing their hospice now because this was a woman in her 30s who a young mother who died in unrelieved pain and agony, and the parents, the husband was not in the picture, but her parents are suing the hospice because they felt that she wasn't given adequate pain control, and that the hospice staff were not well trained in modifying pain, and that can happen. It's not a perfect world, and there are when we say you have choices, you also have choices among hospices. There are 4,000 hospices in America, and in most communities there are a variety of hospice organizations, and there are for-profits and there are non-profits, and there are very long established community hospices, and it's best really to shop around like you would shop around for anything when you're not in the crisis, rather than just take the whatever hospice the hospital gives you when you're at your wit's end.
Sheila, that's a good point. I want to ask you, what makes a good hospice, and how can our listeners choose the best hospice for themselves or a loved one?
Well, you want to know that they're Medicare certified. You want to check, what's the background of the medical director? Is he or she board certified in palliative medicine? What are some of the services that you provide? And do they have any provisions for inpatient care? We often tell people, call the hospice, and you can tell a lot by the reception that you get from the person who takes your phone call. If you are immediately directed to fill out a form, that's one reception. And if your questions are answered, and in a way that you feel satisfied, that's a whole different, that gives you a much different sense of what this organization is about. But most people, ask their friends and family members who've had experience with hospice, and increasingly, because so many more people are using hospice, you'll be able to find people who've had good or less good experience to tell you, what's a good hospice.
Mm-hmm. I love your suggestion of paying attention to that initial phone call to the hospice and what kind of care you give there, and that you get there, and that giving you a sense of how this organization is. I think that's we all have this experience with, you call, and if the person is rushed or impatient, you might want to, see if there are other organizations. I mean, you might have just caught the person at a bad time, but or try again. But it is a good indication, and it's hospice. One of the things that we were so struck by was the people who work in hospice are so passionate about their work, from the receptionist, to the doctor. So there is something in this that really inspires great, wonderful, caring people to work in it. And obviously, it's not for the money. So and you can get that sense pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some good pointers for people on how to choose a hospice when there are so many to choose from. The other thing that you said that it seems helpful to me is to think about these things ahead of time, or at least once a diagnosis has been made. We want to avoid talking and thinking about our own deaths, but that leaves our loved ones at a loss as to what we might want. And we may be in a position where it's harder for us to make decisions given medications that we may be on, or other conditions that may be affecting our cognition when we need to make those choices. What kind of things do you know about that can help people to kind of break through the barriers of talking about their own death, or that can help adult children of aging parents begin to engage with their parents more about what the parents want and how to make decisions.
Yeah, this is this is an area where it is hard to bring it up. You don't have dinner and then say, Mom and Dad, let's talk about death. So it helps to have a tool. And one of our favorite tools is this game that a hospice doctor developed called Go Wish, which is a takeoff on the kids' card game Go Fish. And it's a set of cards with choices about your what you would want at the end of life. From would you want your finances to be in order to do you want your your spiritual care advisor there with you, or do you want to make sure that you're home? And there are 36 cards, and you have to winnow it down to the 10 most important, just so that you get an idea of really what, or do you want to make sure that your pain is controlled? And it's actually kind of fun because my husband and I did this, and we were surprised at each other's answers, and it lightened the the entry point to this topic. And there's a lot of websites and other services that you can find on the web, like Engage with Grace is that's also www.engagewithgrace.org. And there's like questions like, is there someone you trust whom you've appointed to be an advocate when the time is near? And family members may not know that. My co-writer actually, when she asked her mother, who's in her 90s, about her advanced care directives, and her mother said, "Oh yeah, I've done that. I did that years ago." And so they went and looked at it, and it turned out that her proxy is a cousin who has been dead for 17 years. So you do it, but then you also need to you may need to update every once in a while. But there's lots of tools on the web now that help you and that kind of take some of the sting out of this. And as I said, once you start talking about it, it allows you to rather than tensely fight like you're in a war, breathe and accept that this is going to happen, and be prepared. It's such a gift to your family to do that.
Yeah, like you said, as you and your husband used the cards with Go Wish, you were surprised. So even somebody who you're really close to and you think you know what they might want, or vice versa, you might not know when it comes down to really getting very specific about what it is that you would want or not want happening at end of life.
Right, and as you alluded to, you want to know that when the person is able to tell you. You don't want to have to make those decisions on your own when the person is beyond being coherent, and because that can lead to all kinds of family issues with who decides.
Yes.
Who decide. Often the case is that many of the hospice people have told us that often the case is that the relative from farthest away are usually the siblings. The one who's the farthest away flies in and says, "We have to do this, we have to do that," because they haven't been there, and so they haven't been there to experience what it's really like, and they think they maybe feel a little guilty because they haven't been around. So let's do everything modern medicine can throw at mom, and that's what mom deserves. And the poor sibling who's been there taking care of mom has a more realistic picture of what does that mean. So if mom has laid that out ahead of time, it's such a gift.
Yes.
To the family.
Yes, it certainly is. We have just about 2.5 minutes left in the program. I wonder if you have some words of wisdom or a summary that you would like to leave our listeners with before we end. There's so much in this and so much more in your book. But if maybe for about a minute you could share what you think is most important for people to know.
Well, the surprising thing to us was that this is not a depressing topic, that once you start talking about, just say the word death over and over again, it's like, okay, that's not so terrible. And that it also helps you to value the time, that you have left. Both Fran and I now feel like, little things that bothered us before, maybe we don't need to be, spending a lot of energy on that. And that has been, a real surprise with hospice, because often when we told people we were writing this book, they would say, "Oh, why are you doing that? That sounds really, what a downer." And really, it isn't. It's life. That's what we all get. So
Thank you.
It's been a huge gift.
Thank you, Sheila, for sharing that. What a beautiful way to end. Like any other thing that we think is a monster, when we actually turn and face it, we find it's not what we thought it was. So
right. Yeah.
I'm glad you were here with me. I'd like you to stay on the line for a moment when the program ends, if you can do that.
Okay.
Our hour has passed so quickly. Listeners, thank you for being with us, and thank you, Sheila, for joining me today. Join us next week. My guest, Kristen Muller, author of What Are You Waiting For?, will be with us discussing her book by the same title. As Kristen was preparing to write her book, her home in the Colorado mountains was completely destroyed by wildfire. Kristen will share that experience and what she learned in the following years with us next week. Until then, this is Cathy Roberts. Transform yourself, embrace your vitality.
Thank you for listening to Voices for Healing. Please join Cathy Roberts again next Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We wish you the best recovery from your loss, and we'll talk again next week.
Thanks again for listening to the preceding program, brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the preceding program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.